Hello everyone, Ashley here with HeartHookHome.com, and today we are starting part 2 of the Come On I Want a Ruana crochet along. So for part 2 we are going to be crocheting the width from the center that we just finished all the way over to the right side. We're going to work the way up to the shoulders, and then we're going to do the same thing on the left side over here. So all we're doing right now is we've already done the center back column. We're going to be adding the right side and the left side up to the shoulders. Ready? Move this out of the way. I've got my piece here that I worked on in part 1 with you all. Let me get this all situated. So here we have our beautiful column. The column is about 29-30 inches tall after it's all said and done, and that is without stretching it too much when you measure. When you measure, you want it laying just like this. So you can relax the stitches a little bit, but then measure it when it's kind of smaller, right? When it's not so stretched. When we add part 2, so here in a second, when we start crocheting into this part here and then work our way up, this part may shrink just a little bit because of the change in your stitches, right? Because we are using a half double crochet moss stitch instead of the lover's knots that we currently have. So it will shrink up just a little bit as we're working. If you notice, if you do a few rows and you notice that your panel here is like really small compared to here, you might want to go up a hook size for the half double crochet moss stitch that we're getting ready to do together. Cool? So you should have a stitch marker over here from where you left your attached piece of yarn from earlier. We are going to remove that stitch marker now. And really, you could have fastened off here. This is just to keep it to where you don't have to weave in so many ends. And it's easier to start this part. So we ended on the back side here, right? So in order to start this next row, this is going to be row 9 of the right side. So where we're still attached from earlier, we're going to chain 5, which is going to count as a triple crochet and a chain 1. So chain 5. Perfect. Turn it. You're going to do a single crochet in the very first single crochet right here. So the very first of your lover's knot, we're going to do a single crochet in the top of that guy. Now we're going to loosely, not super loose, but loose enough, kind of like the top of the center we did. We're going to somewhat loosely chain 3, and we're going to go into the top of that next peak of the lover's knots. And we're going to chain 3 again, somewhat loosely. Go into the next top of the lover's knot. And we're going to do this all the way across until we get to that center column. Okay, so here's the center column. Let's get resituated here. Such a fun, such a fun thing to get resituated, right? Okay, so what you might notice is, see right here where I joined for my center column? That looks like it's pretty loose. That's a chain right there. You're going to want to pull that chain just to kind of cinch it up, okay? Don't pull it too tight, but pull it tight enough. Now we've got our chain 3 here. I'm going to put my one right here, and then I'm going to do one more chain 3 and go into the same as where we started that center. Okay? So, oops, wrong way. I'm going to do a chain 3 that I've already done. I'm going to go into the top of that next lover's knot. I'm going to do a chain 3. I'm going to go into the same as where we started that center, right? This is where we attached to do the center column. So now we should have 17 of these chain 3 spaces, okay? Because we had 17 sets of lover's knots. If you changed the width of your Ruana, so if you removed 4 stitches to remove one of the lover's knots, or if you added 4 stitches to each side to increase the width of your Ruana, as discussed in part 1, you want to make sure that you're counting the correct number. So if you added 1, you want 18 chain spaces, and if you removed some, you're going to want 15 or 16 or however many you removed, right? So let's take a look. This first one right here is our chain 5 chain that we started the row with. So that does not count. That is just getting the height of the row needed to start the flat portion. So you're going to count, the first one is the first actual completed chain 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, now we are going to start row 10, and I'm going to do a chain 2 to start row 10, and I'm going to flip my work, and we're going to take a look at exactly where I am going with these stitches. I flip my work, and then we're going to take a very close look at what we're doing next. Pull that tail just a little bit for my chains, right? Okay, let's take a look. Okay. When you place this whole next row, row 10, we are going to be placing half double crochets and chains into the chain that we just crocheted, right? So you're going to want to place your half double crochets of this row in the single crochet, right? And then you're going to skip one and put it in the middle of the chain. So every time you have a single crochet, that's where you're going to place your half double. Then you're going to skip one chain, half double, skip one chain, go into the single. Skip the next chain, half double in that one, skip the next one, half double in that single, okay? So the very first one that we have, this chain 3 right here, we're going to skip the very first one and we're going to go into this one, and then we're going to skip this one and go into the top of the single crochet. So I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. I'm going to skip this very first one where my right thumbnail is, and I'm going to go into the center of the next chain 3, right? So half double crochet into the chain that is in the center of that last chain space, right? Okay, now we're going to chain 1. We're going to skip that next chain and we're going to half double crochet into that single crochet. Chain 1, skip that next one, half double crochet into the center of that chain 3, the center stitch. Made that one a little bit small. Chain 1 and go into the center of that single crochet. So we're skipping that chain, going into that single crochet with a half double. Chain 1, go into that middle chain stitch, half double crochet, chain 1 into the single crochet, chain 1 into the middle chain, chain 1 into the single crochet, and just continue the same thing all the way to the end of the row. I do find that it helps to stay a little bit looser as you're crocheting this entire back panel, both the right and the left side. And to be honest, it would be okay if you notice that your panels, after a few rows of this, are starting to shrink a little bit. You could definitely go up a hook size. Instead of just trying to stay loose, you might just go up a hook size. It's okay. As long as you hit gauge, the gauge swatch pattern, it should be fine. But like I said, if you notice, it's not going to hurt anybody if you just go up just to get them a little bit looser. Okay, so your last half double crochet of this row is going to go into the 4th chain, so what would be the top of this treble, right? Or remember how we did a chain 5 here to start this row right here? Your last half double, so you put your half double in that single crochet, and then we're going to chain 1, and your very last double of the row is going to go into the 1, 2, 3, this 4th chain right here. So place your last half double right into the 4th chain of that beginning chain. Cool? All right, so now we have a completed row 10. Woot woot. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Now we are just going to do the half double crochet moss stitch the entire time for the rest of the shoulder until you get to the shoulder, right? So when you're counting your stitches at the end of this row, these need to be 70, and you're counting the half doubles and the chains. And when you, this chain 2 over here that we used to start this row, that counts as 1 stitch. So the chain is 1 and the half double crochet is going to be number 2. So I just like to count them by half doubles, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever. And then when you get to the end, you should have 70. I'm not going to count mine because I'm fairly confident that I have 70 right now. So to start row 11 and for every other row until you get this to be 29 inches as tall as the center column, you're going to be doing row 11. Okay, so let's do row 11 together, and then you're just going to continue row 11 until you reach that height of 29 inches that matches your center column. Okay, so to start row 11, we are going to chain 2, turn, so that we're looking at the right side. Now we are going to half double crochet in that first chain space. Right there, right? We're gonna half double crochet right in that bad boy. Boop, like it. Now chain 1, half double crochet in the next space. Chain 1, half double crochet in the next space. Chain 1, half double in the next. And you're gonna do this. This is it for the rest of part 2, basically. So it's not hard, right? Once you get those chains down, now it is literally just kind of a mindless crochet. This is something that's going to be great to crochet on when you're watching Netflix or something, because you can kind of feel where those chain spaces are instead of having to actually watch everything that you're doing. I mean, it's always a good idea to watch. I would recommend counting your stitches every so many rows, or if you're particularly, if you know that you're bad about losing stitches or adding in extra ones. In mine, I did it as well, where I would accidentally put 2 in one space, or I would skip a space, and so it would be kind of like this, you know. So definitely just count it. And doing the 2, starting with your half double crochet and calling that 2, 4, 6, it really does help keep everything so much cleaner and quicker. So I'm going to continue all the way to the end of this row. Okay, when you get to the very end of row 11, and all of the rows from here on out, you're going to do your half double crochet, chain 1, and then you're going to place your last half double crochet in this chain space right here. Okay, so you're just going to have to make sure that you get it in there. Just like that. That's it. Now to start row 12, you're going to chain 2 and turn. And you're going to put your very first half double crochet of the row in that chain space. And now you're just going to continue adding rows exactly like this. I went until row 68. It doesn't really matter how many you need. It's going to go off of measurements. So what you're going to do on part 2 is you're going to start with this chain going into your Solomon's knots, and then you're going to do this half double crochet moss stitch, right? And you're going to make that to where it's the same exact height as your center column. So when you lay it out flat without stretching, without moving it or anything, they should be pretty much the same height, right? If they're off by ½ inch or even an inch, it's okay. But you want them to be pretty much the same height without really having to stretch or maneuver it too much. So I'm going to continue up until row 68, or however many rows it takes me to get to 29 inches. And then I will hop back on the video and we will start the other side, because the other side is a little bit different than the other side. Okay, we're going to have to reattach the yarn and everything else. So I am going to finish the right side of the Ruana back, and then I will hook up with you again and we will start on the left side. And then once we get that left side, it's going to be the same exact business all the way up. So really the only difference is the starting chain right here and how you manipulate that into the lover's knots. So I will hook up with you guys as soon as I have the right side of the Ruana finished. All right, guys, I have finished my right side of the Ruana back. As you can see, it lays up very nicely with the center column. If I turn it, I don't have a big enough area here to show you, but if I just twist it like this, you can see that it lines up nicely, and when I move it this way, these two ends line up very nicely as well. So what we're wanting to do is make sure that, remember how we measured from the bottom to the top, and this is 29? We just want these to be flat across on both sides. So now that I finished the right side, I did go ahead and leave my yarn attached. So this is the yarn that I was using that was still attached from the very last row of the lover's knots, right? So I've used that same ball to create all of this, and I'm going to leave it attached there. And you can clip it if you want to, but honestly, I wouldn't, because this is just so that we have less ends to weave in and it makes it look cleaner without having to change yarn so many times. So leave that right where it is. I'm going to pull from my other new skein. This is the skein that I used to make just this center portion when I attached with this yarn here. So I'm going to use just the rest of this ball. Now I'm going to start in the corner here, and we are going to create the left side. So we'll have a right side and a left side. So if you're looking at the pattern, which I do recommend looking at the pattern at the same time as you are crocheting with me here, I'm going to leave a 40-inch-ish tail. So I'm going to do the same thing. Remember how we left this huge tail? We're going to leave a huge tail right here. And then we're going to use these tails to sew it up at the end of part 2. So, and we'll do that together too. Don't be worried about the sewing. It's really not too bad. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. And we are going to leave that really long tail. Let me pull that just a little bit. Should have done that first, sorry. And now I'm going to insert my hook into the same as where we ended the center column. So I'm going to go right into that same stitch right there. Pull up a loop and get ready to crochet. Okay, let me move my tail. I'm going to chain 2, kind of loosely, don't be too tight with it. Chain 2, we're going to single crochet in the first single crochet. So this one right here, okay? See, that's a lover's knot. We're going to go right into that single crochet. Now we're going to loosely chain 3, single crochet in the top of that next lover's knot, just like we did when we started the right side. It's just that we're starting with a different number of chains since we're starting in that center column instead of the outside like we did on the right side. So we're just making these 3 chains and single crocheting into the next lover's knot. We're going to do this all the way to the end, and then we will be ready to continue just making the back, right? The remainder. On this, I did go to 68 rows on my right side. Like I said earlier, just make sure that your the center, the right, and the left all end at the same height, and you'll be fine. Much easier for sewing that way. Okay, your last one is going to go into the very last stitch right here. So I'm going to go right into that last one right there. So now I have my chain spaces across the whole top here like I did on the other side. So now all we have left to do is to create the half double crochet moss stitch like we did for this entire right back panel. So to start row 10, we're going to do our chain 2. We're going to turn and move all of it here. Get it out of the way. Okay, so row 10, we chain 2, turn. We're going to half double crochet in that very first stitch. So half double crochet in the very first. chain 1, skip the next chain, half double crochet in the center chain of that chain 3, just like we did on the other side. Chain 1, go into that single crochet, chain 1, go into the center chain, chain 1, into the single crochet, and you're going to complete this all the way until you reach the center column. All right, now we have reached the end of row 10, and it's very important at this point in the pattern that you count your stitches at the end of row 10 for the left side. You want to make sure that on this row you have 70 stitches. When you count these, your very first half double crochet is going to be your second stitch, because this chain does count as a stitch. So the chain is 1, the half double crochet is 2. So you're counting your half doubles and the chains all the way across, and make sure that you're ending with this at the end of row 10 being a 70. So on row 11, we're going to start the exact same thing that we did on the other side, which is the moss stitch half double crochet. So in order to start that, I'm going to chain 2. We're going to turn the whole piece, and I'm going to do half double crochet in that first space, chain 1, out of the way. Now we're going to do a half double crochet in the next space right here, chain 1, half double crochet in the next space, and you just keep on just like we did on the other side for the entire left side, and that's it. So you're going to do the same number of rows that you did on the left side, and then when you finish those rows, we will meet up together. Now, I've got a little bit of yarn barf coming off. I am going to go ahead, before I get too far, I am going to go ahead and wind up this long tail just like I did this one over here, just to keep it out of my way as I'm working. And then as soon as I finish all of my rows on this left side here, then we will go through and sew these sides up. It's really not as bad as it sounds, so don't be intimidated. We'll do it together, and I will hook back up with you as soon as I finish row 68 on this side, which will get me to 29 inches total. So I'll see you guys in just a little bit. All right, and we now have a completed right, center, and left side to the back of our Ruana. A quick note about the sides here. The sides themselves should be around 15 inches wide if you're on gauge. Like I said, gauge really isn't super important, so it can be 14, it can be 13 and a half, it could be 15 and a half, it could be 16. As long as you're within like an inch or inch and a half of 15 inches, it will be fine. So the next step in our Ruana, for the last part of part 2, we are going to use these tails that we left at the beginning of creating our sides to sew up these edges. And it looks really daunting. Not gonna lie, it's not a whole lot of fun, but it's really not that bad either. So we're gonna do this together, and there are some tips and tricks that I will share with you as we go along. So I'm gonna remove the stitch marker from where I was holding this yarn in place. Set it aside. So now I've got this long tail that I'm going to use for the sewing of it, right? Which is really awesome, because now the way that we've worked this using different yarn balls, because I've got this one over here and this one over here, and these are still attached to the top up there because we're going to use these to continue part 3. So leave those attached where they are. I love how we're using these long tails so we don't have extra ends to weave in. It's like my favorite thing ever. So I'm going to thread this needle. I have one of these, it's a Singer, I think it's actually an upholstery or a leather or something needle. It's really, really pointy, and it works so great for weaving in ends. So I'll put a link to this exact set. It comes with like 4 or 5 different needles also, so it's really helpful when you are weaving in ends and sewing crochet together. The very first thing you're going to want to do before you actually start sewing anything, you're going to want to take some stitch markers, and you're going to want to find, let me put this off to the side here. You're going to want to find the top of your two pieces. Okay, this you want to be flush when we're done sewing. So I'm going to put a stitch marker at the top here to hold these two together. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just keeping it so it doesn't flip-floppy around as we're sewing the bottom half. Okay, now you can't see the entire frame, and it's as far out as I can go, so I apologize about that. But let me take this stitch marker out too. Okay, you're going to want to lay it as flat as possible, and you're just going to want to place several stitch markers incrementally along. So the bottom is nice and flat right here where it lines up, right? So we're going to leave that right where it is. I might put a stitch marker like right here. You don't want to place them too often, but often enough to where you can tell if you're getting off track, right? So I'm just going to, somewhere right there, I'm going to move it down just a little bit, and so there's my stitch marker right here. So I'm just going to pull this down to where it's still lined up. I'm going to pinch it in another spot and put in another stitch marker. Okay, now a little bit more. So here's my top, and it's all nicely, there's no like big, you know, crinkling on one side or anything. They all line up very nicely. So if yours aren't lining up nicely, you can either add or remove a few rows if you need to from the sides. We will be continuing crocheting these, so you might not frog it. Just find the same exact row on both sides. Okay, so now that we've got this pinned into place a little bit, right, we are going to start actually sewing. And I'm going to leave this side just hanging out over here so that we can focus on this side for right now. Okay, so I've got my end with my needle. Let's zoom in. Oops. Okay. So where we left this, right here, you want to kind of pull that just a little bit to make sure that it's nice. You're not going to leave a huge hole there. And now all we're going to do is we're going to sew very carefully back and forth between these two pieces, just like you're sewing, like lacing a shoelace or something. So you want to make sure that you are grabbing one piece from one side and then going directly into the corresponding piece on the other side. The number one thing when sewing this together is to not pull your yarn too tightly. If you pull it too tightly, then it's going to pucker and it's going to look weird when it's laying on your back. So stay loose is the name of the game here. So I'm just going to pull some of this stitch right here. Okay, we're going to go through that. And then we're going to find the corresponding stitch where this is coming out of. We're going to go right across here. There's really no rhyme or reason that I have found. This is my third Ruana, or fourth technically, and there's really no rhyme or reason that I have found to for how many rows should match up on this side, and that's part of the reason that I decided to do a measurement also instead of a row count, because everyone is so different. I didn't want it to be puckering for some and not for others. So just continue sewing these together. I like to make sure that I'm going through at least half of a stitch. See how I've got two loops here? It just makes it a little bit more stable since we're not going to be pulling really tightly with our yarn. And as you're going, when you pull this tight, just make sure that you're not going too tight, because if you pull this too tight right now, it's going to do this, right? And it looks just like, whoa, that looks crazy. So kind of leave it loose and open. I promise you, with as open as this is and as open as this is, if you have just a tiny little gap here, no one's going to notice because it's so holy anyway. So I'm just going to continue sewing this back and forth between these two sides without pulling super tightly. And I do recommend leaving this on a table where you can sit there and just not move it. You don't want to move your piece too much. You want it to lay lined up with the stitch markers as they are, right? There we go. I'm going to come from this side and go back into this side. So we're just going back and forth. You don't have to have a super pointy needle for this, but I really like these. needles. They're excellent for weaving in ends. So I'm going to pull it down just a little bit. When you get close enough to a stitch marker, you can go ahead and remove it. We're just going back and forth the whole time, making sure that we're not pulling too tightly. You can check how tightly you're sewing this by kind of pulling it apart like this. That is how you pretty much want it to be. I'm going to tighten it up just a little bit because you can see this right here. So I'm going to tighten it just enough, but I don't want to pull it so tight that it starts to pucker, right? So when you pull it apart like this, it should barely come apart. Fuzzy here. Okay, so we're going to just continue going. And this is all it is for the whole back. And like I said, if you just treat it like you're tying a shoelace or lacing a shoe, then it's not too bad. I'm going to remove this one since we're getting pretty close to it. And the stitch markers help to make sure that you're evenly on track, because you don't want, if I can get this off there, you don't want one side to have a lot more fabric than the other, right? I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so you can see more of the piece. And I'm just going to keep on sewing back and forth and back and forth. When you get up to the top here, I recommend not sewing in the very, very top part. I'll show you why. So here we are, almost finished. Now I'm almost to the very top. You can go ahead and connect these two pieces right here. Isn't that great how they lined up so nicely? I'm pretty proud of myself. So you can either go ahead and connect these two pieces, or you can leave it. I'm going to choose to leave it right where it is. I'm going to go ahead and pull my my needle out, so I'm going to set it off to the side so that I'm not using that right now. I'm going to leave this yarn just hanging out, and the reason that I'm going to do that is because I'm about to start part 3, and in part 3 we are going to continue crocheting with this, and I don't want, if I sew these two together, I don't want to make this space right here really hard to get into, so I'll just leave this here, and then at the very end I'm going to leave this string through all of the parts until we're completely done with our Ruana, and then we're going to use this to sew up any ends that are right on where your shoulder sits. So this is going to be the back of your neck, and these are your shoulders, right? So we're going to, after we put the border on and everything, we're going to use this tail to sew that together and to make sure that everything is nice and together and no holes or anything like that. So now I'm going to do exactly what I just did with this right side. See how pretty that is? Ah, it's so fun. When you actually get this part together, part 2, and you hold it up in the air, the weight of this should really help open these stitches up, and maybe not so much on the bottom. That will come when we add the border at the very end. But so for the rest of part 2, all you're going to do is line up with your stitch markers on this side and sew these together exactly how you did this side right here. So we're just going to do the same exact thing over here, and then next Saturday we will be ready for part 3 of the crochet along. So I will see you all soon. Sew up your Ruana pieces. Have a glass of wine with it. It's not so bad. It'll be over before you know it. Kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid. Just do it and get it over with. So I will see you guys next Saturday for part 3 of the Come On I Wanna Ruana crochet along.